Hi everyone, Nemo here. In February 2014, Dallin 8 Jokes said the following.
Apostle John uses the term antichrist to describe one who denieth the Father and the Son. Today, those who deny the existence of God are called atheists. Some of these ridicule the faith of those who believe in what cannot be proven, even as they aggressively deny a godly existence they cannot disprove.
And so with that warning about Antichrist being synonymous with atheist ringing in my ears, in 2017 I moved to university and I shared a flat with my flatmate who was just such an atheist. And the fear of ridicule was real. But let's introduce him, shall we? Hey.
Hello there. Ridiculed you were.
Right, so everyone, this is Michael. I had to check my notes to remember his name. Michael, tell us about you. Tell us about who you are.
I'm Michael. I'm a Capricorn. I like movies and long walks along the beach, and I'm just looking for that special someone, really. Yeah. No,
Right.
I'm an aspiring lawyer, and I'm an agnostic atheist. And I met Nemo here when we were at university, as he mentioned. And yeah, I've been going on a philosophical journey with him ever since, really.
See, like all lawyers, the church is not gonna like you because lawyers in the scriptures are the ones that are always trying to trick Jesus and make him look bad. So yeah, you got that working against you, bud. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's just too easy. Is the thing.
Right. So right off the bat, the first question would be, had you ever heard about Mormonism before you met me?
So yes, though I think I'd heard about it in the same way that the average sort of Westerners heard about it, which is via Trey Parker's musical, The Book of Mormon, which I had seen before we met.
Oh, you'd seen it?
I hadn't seen the South Park episode, which is where I think a lot of people learn the basics of Mormonism. But I'd seen the musical and I'd heard about Mormonism, but I didn't really know too much about it. I knew that it was an American-centric Christian denomination.
Right.
And that people knocked on your doors in the same way that Jehovah's Witnesses do. Other than that, I knew basically nothing about it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. Sorted. Done. Everyone, let's go home.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was your perspective of Mormonism? What did you think of it? What was your your thoughts, feelings about Mormonism?
Well, I was so excited when I found out. Our first interaction was indirect. I remember what our first interaction was. It was from my end. I was in the kitchen of our flat with Connor, one of our flatmates, and he had spoken with someone at the front desk, and he knew who our flatmates were. I didn't. Connor was the only person I knew coming into the flat, and he was telling me about the people that had come in. He said, "Oh, there's a guy from Wales. There's a guy who's a Muslim, so that should be really interesting chatting with him. And the other guy is a Mormon." And I immediately shouted, "Yes!" really loud. I was so excited to be like, I got to ask this guy what the F is going on with this situation, basically. So I'm sure you'll have heard that from down the hall as you were loading your stuff into your room. And straight away from that moment, it was like, I need to pick this guy's brain and find out what's going on. And straight away, I got to say, it was kind of strange, really, because obviously most people have met a fairly Orthodox Christian, I'd say, or at least a practicing Christian, someone who goes to church on Sundays and believes in God, reads the Bible and prays. But never had I met someone who believed that they couldn't drink tea or coffee as a result of what God was saying. So that was quite an interesting introduction. Yeah, I found out you couldn't watch any films rated 15 or above, which was quite a shock. Couldn't drink any hot drinks. But I guess the concern began when you told me about temple garments.
Right.
I'm assuming that your audience know everything about most things about the basics of Mormonism and know what temple garments are. But from my perspective, the idea that you basically have prescribed underwear, really, that is of no special quality other than the fact that you have to have bought it from the church and that it's more expensive pound for pound than the exact same underwear. That was, I guess, the first red flag. Yeah, quite a strange and concerning introduction, really.
Okay, Right, so we were all at different kind of times in our university journey, and we'd all kind of come together because you were a couple of years on in university from me, weren't you?
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
I was in my
Your final
effectively my fourth year because I'd done an internship. So, but yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
it was your first year, right?
Yeah.
That you were joining
Yeah,
us.
it's my first year. So I was fresh to university as an experience. I was a brand new return missionary. So I'd just come from being like hyper zealous about Mormonism, and wanting to teach people all about it. And so I'm there viewing this as like a great missionary opportunity. I'm like, yeah, people to tell about the church. And like I unashamedly told lots of people at university about the church and went around telling all everyone that would listen about my beliefs. So we had quite an open flat though, didn't we? It was quite good.
We did. We had an open and varied flat. It sounds like the beginning of a joke, really. You know, it's like a Mormon, a atheist, an agnostic, a Muslim, and a Welshman walking to a bar. Yeah,
say no more.
It was indeed.
Well, so, something I want to give credence to actually is this bell here that I'll show the audience. Which
a holy relic.
Indeed, I was gifted this. So this sat on the coffee table in the kitchen sort of seating area, where we would have debates. We'd have quite intense debates, which we'll talk about. But if at some point someone was uncomfortable or someone felt like they needed to call quits on things, they would just ring the bell, and that was it. That was it.
It was our safe word sort of thing. Wasn't it?
Essentially, yeah, it was like a safe word for our debates. So it sat there, and then it was given to me as a wedding gift by Connor. So you imagine,
and rightly so. I mean, I spent at least £1.29 at Wilco on that, so
exactly.
I'm glad it's in safe hands.
Exactly, it is in safe hands, and it is very much valued. So yeah, those debates. Tell us a little bit about that, Michael.
Yeah, so in legal circles, there's a term which is gunner. It's more of an American thing than a British thing, but it gets around sometimes. And basically, a gunner is a person who is always keen to engage in argumentation and start a discussion and start a debate. If you're at the pub and someone always wants to talk about politics or recent news events or social media or any kind of sort of provocative topic, and in years gone by, religion, that person is a gunner. And essentially, we had a flat of 5 gunners, really. Yes. Connor and I were probably the most, I would say, of the lot, but everybody got involved. And it led to some very consistent and long debates and discussions in our communal area in the flat until the early hours of the morning about essentially every philosophical and spiritual topic you can name.
And people say this all the time. They say, oh, we used to sit up and talk about everything under the sun. It's like, well, yeah, but we had such a diverse group that we literally talked about anything you could imagine when it came to sort of people's philosophies and people's viewpoints. It was an eye-opener for me, certainly.
Well, the stakes were quite high, really. Obviously, the discussions we were having, we weren't arguing per se and calling each other idiots or saying that the other person was necessarily wrong, but we were discussing the merits of lots of religious stories and like sociocultural ideas, which were quite core to the heart of certain people. So if we talk about morality, there'd be interesting questions for you to ask to Connor and I about where our morality comes from. And similarly, when Connor and I were talking about certain passages of the Bible or the Quran or certain sort of social elements of those faiths, it could get quite high stake for the people in it. So it was more than just a bit of a close conversation with friends. It was very much, getting to the nitty gritty of things, which of course had results.
For 5 people who didn't really know each other very well, we dove straight in. I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Tom Trails for the donation there. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. So I wanted to talk about this actually because I learned a lot of kind of debating terms from yourself and from Zaid, who is in the chat. He has doxed himself thoroughly by admitting that he got 0 sleep. Hey Zaid.
Ahlan wa sahlan, habibi.
Ahlan, habibi. Zaid is a wonderful chap. I would like to get him on the channel at some point to talk about the Mormon relationship with Islam, because our church likes to play buddy-buddy with Islam, but there are some quite key doctrinal differences that really kind of could put a spanner in those works. So we'll have a chat about that in the future. But I learnt what ad hominem was for the first time. I learnt about logical fallacies, I learnt about straw men, I learnt about steel men. I learned about all these sorts of words, and I kind of feel like I have you, Connor and Zaid and Gareth to thank for that.
Yeah, it's probably likely. Yeah, I mean
Mm-hmm.
those terms got thrown around a lot. Obviously, we would try to avoid ad hominem. We
Mm-hmm.
weren't a very ad hominem centric group, but absolutely. And I think learning, not that we're experts in any sense imaginable, but learning
Mm-hmm.
those terms and learning how to properly discuss things with people, I think is really key to being able to get anywhere with any discussion.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Definitely. And it opened me up immediately to feeling like I wasn't attacked, because this is one of the things I'd love to share with folks about the way that this was all approached, is that I didn't feel, or there were times when I did, and that was my fault because I wasn't actually being attacked. But it gave me the terminology with which to realize that I wasn't actually being attacked and people kind of coming after me. It was just that I didn't like what was being said, or I was uncomfortable with it, or it was threatening to my worldview. And I was able to realize that that was the difference, because it's so easy to hide behind a victim narrative when you're having these sorts of discussions. And Mormons do this a lot. We go into this kind of persecution place where we feel like the world's out to get us, when actually a lot of times people just want to know things, as you did.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I was pretty more keen for knowledge than anyone at the beginning. I just wanted to know why you guys, had these certain beliefs. And obviously, I think everyone in our flat is very intelligent, or like happen to be five. I shouldn't say four very intelligent people. And it was interesting to know where the root of those kind of beliefs would be, based on how sort of the reasoning capabilities of everybody there. It was particularly interesting when we started to quite quickly get to the point where we realized that there didn't need to be a binary outcome. When we were discussing things, it wasn't that it was an argument where somebody would win and it was either right or wrong. We could often get to a place where we realized we didn't really know. I'd bring up the omniscience argument, and you and Zaid would be like, well, Will needs to speak with priests about that because we don't actually have an answer ourselves. And I found that to be such a healthy conclusion to that particular discussion, because it's honest. And I found that generally, like, reaching honesty was an overall theme for me in the flat. For all the discussions we've had, we'd feel as though we had a position to start with, but then through honesty with ourselves and our own reasoning and our own beliefs, we'd arrive at something different and be able to grow from that, which I think was awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to pop this number up on screen. Thank you very much. New name Adam, saying keep up the great job, and Keith is doing fine. Keith, for your benefit, Michael, is a horse much like this horse here, who was won in a competition. So Keith is in a new home now in the US, and he's doing fine. So thank you very much, new name Adam. Okay,
great.
so that honesty,
I do just about know that. I can just about know the tapir meme. Yeah,
the tapir meme.
I've just about
Excellent.
got that.
So that honesty, I think, is really important, that we were able to have honest discussions. And at times that would make us very uncomfortable, and there'd be the frustration. Do you want to talk about the time when you confronted the idea of a source of light with me? Do you remember this?
Yes. Indeed. I believe that, now this might be incorrect, but in a Bible passage, it describes that the sun and the moon are two sources of light, effectively, that they provide their own light. The sun provides light in the day, and the moon provides light in the dark. And we had this long discussion around the fact that obviously when these older books were written, they didn't understand the fact that the moon was only a reflective surface. And lots of ancient civilizations believed that the moon emitted its own light. They saw it as a separate entity, as some sort of guardian for the nighttime. It's often personified as a protective goddess. Whereas nowadays we know that it's just a giant mirror, effectively. And we had this long discussion about the fact that it actually isn't a source of light, and that the descriptors in the Bible or in the Book of Mormon are false. They're sort of in an objective sense. That's not a correct way to explain what's going on, which means that requires justification, because as soon as you start finding any issues with the validity of what's being claimed, it really puts everything else into question as well.
And so I went into almost like a bit of a meltdown mode. I remember distinctly saying at one point, I can't talk about this. I can't do it. And you were very calm. You're like, no, I'm just saying, maybe they didn't understand back then. Maybe that's just how it was written. You were very carefully. You were doing what I would later refer to as extrapolating the argument. So what you were very careful not to do is you were very careful to contain it to the one thing we were discussing about, and not allow it to bleed through to then what that says about the overall validity of the entire text, etc., etc. Sometimes that can be a correct way of kind of broadening the argument by starting with a core definition and then moving forward. Socrates does this quite a bit, but for that case, it was very important and I say this as a lesson to those watching who are having these discussions with others, if you're going to be confronting something like this, confront it in isolation, because it can be too overwhelming, even that one small thing for some people. So that's something to be sensitive to. Did you know you were doing that on purpose, or was that just...
100%? Yeah. So that's such a key thing. It's very much. This is a very strange analogy, but if you're trying to learn a musical instrument, which I know you play the guitar. Some days when you're going at it and you're learning and you're practicing, it doesn't really sink in, and you can't really get things to work, and things aren't really clicking. And then you rest on it, and you try again the next day, and suddenly everything's working. Everything seems to have clicked into place, because overnight your brain's been able to restructure the information you've gained, and you're then able to use it. I think the same it's a same situation with trying to convince someone or bring somebody around to a new point of view. I think you need to give them the seeds of understanding, but not expect them to fully materialize a sort of a conclusion from that in the immediate term. You need to give them the tools to be able to work it out themselves.
Yeah. Jonathan Haidt's work was very informative to me on this point when he talks about the model of the elephant and the rider. And we kind of discussed some of this a little bit, but not to any great extent. And I read this book after living with you, but he talks about the model of an elephant, which is based, it's our feelings, it's how we feel about things, it's our gut instinct, our gut reactions to things. And then we have the rider, who kind of isn't really in control, can try and steer the elephant a little bit, but generally is just there to make excuses for whatever the elephant does. And sometimes our conscious thoughts and our conscious brain is actually just acting as a press secretary for whatever we actually end up doing. And this is not an invitation for you to get into determinism, because we do not have the time for that. But it is a really good way of looking at it in terms of, if you want to change someone's mind, you have to kind of address how they feel about something, not just cognitively how they understand it. Because some people feel things are right, and you get the backfire effect because of those strong feelings. If you confront it too harshly logically, they just grip hold a bit tighter.
Absolutely. Well, you absolutely, the thing you were describing earlier is effectively cognitive dissonance, and is of course, there are multiple anchors to an idea. There are multiple reasons you hold an idea in your head. It's one of the reasons why religious beliefs can be so strongly anchored in your mind, is because there's the social element and the emotional element, the idea that you've trusted people with these ideas, as well as the logic behind the ideas themselves. So of course there are so many barriers to get through there, and that takes time. As you say, you've got to be able to give the time for that to be able to develop. But I think that the moon emitting light side of things was a precursor to what I think is probably the most shocking or enlightening for me part of our discussions about your journey in your reconsiderations of your belief state, which I'm sure you'll be able to predict. But it's the results of our discussions on Noah's Ark.
Yes.
So yeah, we had, I think it was a series of evenings over the course of a week. We'd have several conversations about Noah's Ark. That's usually my go-to of a sort of starting point for considering the fact that biblical stories aren't literally true. Of course, I should also caveat all of this that discussing things with Nemo, I didn't go into this with the intention of changing his belief necessarily. It was more about just broadening his horizons. And whilst I am an agnostic atheist, I'm not an anti-theist. I see a lot of use in faith and religion and spirituality. I think there's a lot of lifestyle improvements. It's can often be a really useful crutch for people to believe on. But similarly, I think that when you take things too dogmatically or literally true, that's where you open the door to more risk and danger, which we can discuss in a short while. But when discussing things not being literally true, Noah's Ark is a great place to start, because the more you look at that story, the more absurd it sounds, really. So we'd start by discussing the fact that obviously there wasn't an enormous flood, because that's not how ecology works. We discussed the fact that the boat wouldn't possibly have been able to house that number of animals, the fact that almost every species of beetle would have been dead by the end of the 40-day period, the fact that all of the burrowing species would have eaten the boat, the fact that one lion and one lioness will not sufficiently reproduce lions. They're used to a pride family structure, so the lion will probably just eat the lioness. There's more and more and more issues the more you go on with it. Not to mention the fact that bacteria and viruses would have died out. Sea level caves still have stalagmites and stalactites. It's even if you ignore the fact that Noah was supposedly 600 years old and reproduced the entire human race with just his wife and children, it's such an absurd consideration to consider that to be true. And as a result of these discussions was something I genuinely found really profound. I remember coming out of my room and you were sat in the sort of corridor that ran along the entrance to all of our rooms in the flat, and you just had a call with the sort of, I guess, the local church where you were running sort of a Sunday school-esque teaching service. Essentially, you were teaching younger Mormons about what the Book of Mormon said, and you told me that you'd called them to say that you didn't still feel comfortable taking a class on Noah's Ark because you weren't sure that it was definitely true anymore. And I felt a couple of things at that moment. The first thing I thought was, that's really exciting. That's a really interesting development. The second thing I thought was, oh darn, I hope I haven't damaged. Yeah, I was really worried because I thought, everybody has struggles in their lives, and I thought, what if for any past or future struggle, your solid base in Mormonism is going to be a really useful tool to help you cope with it. I knew that you weren't like a vicious person or a vindictive person on the basis of any of your religious beliefs. So I was worried that have I just suddenly chipped away at something which actually is going to be a really important thing in his life. But the third thing I felt, and I felt that later even stronger, was I was so impressed about the fact that you were genuinely considering the things we discussed. You were genuinely honest, as I've mentioned earlier, with yourself about being like, I don't know whether I definitely believe this anymore. Based on my information, being honest with myself, even though I believe there's a God and even though I believe he wouldn't lie about this sort of thing, this doesn't add up quite, and I can't pass this on to other people until I've checked. And I thought that was so admirable. That's like such an admirable trait. Because so many people would just push it to the back of their mind, turn it off like a light switch, and they'd go straight into passing it on or whatever.
Yeah,
I thought that was a really big moment in the flat.
Zaid set it up for me because we were having this discussion, and there's two things you need to know about Zaid. Is that he is in the middle of studying for a PhD in physical geography, right? The man knows stuff about the Earth and the way that works. And then the second bit is the Islamic belief on the flood. And when he's stood there in a doorway going, no, we just believe it was like a localized flood. I'm like, okay, so I am the only one here. And he's another religious person too, but I am the only one here who, up until this point, believed a literal flood had occurred, and sort of stuff. So I was able to hear not just like an atheist perspective on the burrowing beetles would have destroyed the ark. Imagine if you got a woodworm, that ark's gone. This sort of stuff, right? It's all that. Yeah. Is
Does Noah know how to separate different strains of E. coli?
Exactly. But there's also someone else who still holds their religious faith, who's holding me out a kind of halfway house to make it slightly more comfortable. And I think part of the magic that we had was that we had you and Connor more militantly atheist than you, I would say. Always more militant. And then we had Gareth, who was very relaxed, very chilled out. And then we had Zaid, who presented this kind of halfway house, a very orthodox religion, a very, well known to be very orthodox and to have a lot of the same things that Mormonism has going on with big families, strong family structure, a lot of social pressure. He was able to hold this idea that this wasn't the way it's presented. And maybe that just comes from his religious text, but it's still new to me and provides a different way for me to look at it. So I thought that was really quite important.
Absolutely. I think that's what led to the success of so many of our chats. I say success as in them being enjoyable, but also all of us picking up new information, was that we had the different echelons of where people were on each topic. And obviously, even with our Welshman friend and Connor and myself not believing in a God, we had vastly different views on lots of other topics. And obviously, one of the biggest clashes being climate change between him and Zaid. Lots of other huge clashes of all these sorts of things. Yeah. But I think that definitely led to the success of the chats for sure. But I think that one of the things, unless you want to move on to another particular question.
No, carry on.
One of the things I found was really quite good was the fact that we were also able to talk about the social impact of faiths. I remember at one point, and I don't know maybe this was a bit hyperbolic of me perhaps, but I once described you and Zaid as being somewhat cursed, with the fact that you had been born into faiths.
Uh-huh.
So the faiths themselves were hardwired to aspects of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately for you, there were elements of yours that weren't as hardwired as others.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, with Zayd, essentially, it's a full systematic hardwiring. And I say unfortunately not because I think that a particular faith is terrible or anything, but of course it means that if you are ever to reach a state such as you did, where the degree of your faith shifts and the specific things you believe in changes, it can be very difficult socially to be able to make any changes to your life. If you're the way that your family runs, your yearly traditions, even the way you dress, your daily timetable are based on things that you've been brought up with, it can be incredibly difficult to do that. And where that becomes toxic is where you have the connections with the personal control. One of the reasons I'm really pleased that you became less of a believer in the Mormon faith than you started out to be was that this is definitely going to be hyperbolic, but Mormonism is effectively a pyramid scheme. If you look at the way tithing works, if you describe to somebody, if you describe to an ancient king that you had a tool that was able to unite the people, encourage them to reproduce, encourage them to be loyal and fight for you, and to eat prescribed diets, certain restricted foods, certain restricted actions, to condemn those that commit crimes, even if you don't have faith in the legislature, that would be an incredibly useful tool for raising an army and conquering things, such as the Abrahamic religions were. With Mormonism, it seems to be the capitalist version of that. If you were to design a religion for maximum capital efficiency, you would make it such that all of your members have to pay you 10% of their income every year for their whole life, and send their children off for an extended sales expedition, basically, around the world to bring more people in. Each of those will bring more, each of those will bring more, each of those will bring more, and it's all done in the name of God, when really it's all done in the name of accumulating an $100 billion wealth fund, which is that's not really a defendable position in any case. And other faiths have some things that are similar, but they're done differently. So in Islam, I'm sure many of your viewers will know about zakat, I think it's how it's pronounced, which is where you give 2.5% of your income, but it goes directly to charitable purposes. It's not accumulated. It's basically spent immediately. And obviously those charitable purposes might be things that are more Islam-centric, but it's not just built up and used to construct enormous temples or whatever.
And so shameless plug at this point, I have started a petition to allow Mormons to do the same. We've realized the church doesn't need our money anymore, so let's give our 10% tithe to God by way of charity, rather than Salt Lake's coffers, where it just kind of sits and and doesn't really do much, as I've discussed in other videos.
That's
and
a
also
fantastic
thanks
initiative.
Doug Vincent for the tip, because I'm building my own little pyramid scheme here.
Yeah, soon you'll be getting your viewers to go and start their own YouTube channels and give you 10% of their subscribers.
I'll be their upline and they can pass the money up.
Yeah. Praise Nemo.
But it's interesting that you say pyramid scheme, because Mormonism is replete with them. Multi-level marketing, right? Mormonism is members of the church seem, funnily enough, very predisposed to this kind of behavior of get in and then bring other people in and get them to support you while you pass it up the chain, right? That sort of behavior is there's no wonder that Utah has so many multi-level marketing schemes.
Yeah, it's very evocative of like Amway or Herbalife or whatever. It's quite scary. But the thing is, it's so much worse than those, because Mormonism doesn't just present an opportunity. It's not as if people are going into it because they want to own their own planet, or maybe they are. For those of you who don't know, who are watching this, in Mormonism, you're promised your own planet if you tick all the boxes. I don't know. I was listening to a fantastic podcast recently called "Am I in a Cult?", which I would certainly recommend. The first 2 episodes are about the polygamist side of Mormonism, and one of the podcast hosts hears about the fact that you get to own a planet, and their first response is, what the hell am I going to do with an entire planet? I can't even manage my own household. That sounds crazy.
Eternal polygamous sex to populate it. It's a cell. It's a cell for men.
Yeah, although there's a certain age of women that are usually associated with that, which is not a very comfortable topic. I won't delve into too much, but yeah, I'm sure people will be able to find that online, and lots of your viewers already know. but yes, it's more Mormonism is more insidious in its pyramid scheme structure, and I mean Orthodox Mormonism is more insidious than something like Amway or Herbalife, because it doesn't just present an opportunity to get rich. It actually essentially says that if you don't do this, you're foolish because you won't be able to enter the celestial plane, or whatever the terminology is. I can't remember. Celestial kingdom. Close. Sorry, yeah, nearly there. And also, you're morally not in the right state if you don't follow this guidance, because Joseph Smith, the convicted charlatan that founded the faith, would be, I'm sure, really disappointed from looking down at you from his planet. Did he get a planet? I guess he got his own planet.
Must have done. Because he did more save Jesus only for the salvation of mankind than any other man that lived. And Joseph Smith once famously boasted that Jesus' disciples left him, but the Mormons haven't left me yet. Not even Jesus could manage to keep the people together. So, even though
the people tried to kill Joseph Smith.
Those are other people. They're dirty outsiders.
Sure. Oh gosh. Yes. Indeed. Honestly, reading about the origins of the faith is so entertaining. It's such a, obviously it's played for laughs in the South Park episode and Book of Mormon and that sort of stuff. But the degree to which there's hilarity in its formation is boundless. It's such a fascinating story. And the amendments made. Sorry, I'm totally derailing this. Go for it. The amendments made to the original Christian story, the fact that Jesus came to America and the situation with the horses that you referenced, and the fact that, if I understand correctly, Jesus cursed the Native Americans to turn their skin red.
Black.
Isn't it? But turn the skin black. That's not like an acceptable thing to put in a religious text.
No.
Anywhere.
But the Doctrine of Mormonism goes further than that. Up until 1978, it was believed that men of black African descent were the seed of Cain who killed his brother. And because Cain killed his brother, they were cursed to be dark and loathsome. So they were not allowed the blessings of entering the temple. They weren't allowed to hold the priesthood up until 1978. And that's where you get that famous line in Book of Mormon where it says, I believe that in 1978 God changed his mind about black people. Because that is when it was all of a sudden allowed. This didn't apply to Polynesians. It didn't apply to people, any other people with dark sort of skin. Indians, people from the Indian subcontinent, that sort of thing. It didn't apply to any of those. It was just men of black African descent.
It's interesting that God's perspective on things seems to very closely approximate Western liberal cultural values, isn't it?
But it's also very interesting that God's perspective on things comes years after the rest of Western liberal values have changed things.
It's strange, isn't it? Yeah, very odd.
It's also strange that God changed his mind when they were building a temple in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and they realized they couldn't work out who was brown because they're Brazilian, who was brown because they were from, Africa. So they were like, if we want this temple to run, I guess we've got to let everyone in, right?
Because you want that tithe.
It's funny that their tax-exempt status at BYU as a religious university was being threatened over their racist policies regarding athletics around 1970s. Yeah, a lot of external pressure involved in that decision, I'm sure.
Yes, assuredly so.
We've got another tip coming in.
Oh, wow.
Thank you very much, Fordan Gamzee. Thank you very much for that tip indeed. So, Michael, any other things in your notes?
I think I guess a very slight addition to what I was mentioning earlier around the fact that the faith is clearly designed as a pyramid scheme to extract money from pious people. I think that also one thing that I found it really interesting to be able to deconstruct with you and Zaid was the fact that religions also have control over so many aspects of your personal life. In particular, they control sex to a really strong degree. And that can actually have long-lasting damaging effects on members of the faith. Sometimes it can be a positive thing if it's encouraging people to not have children out of wedlock and that sort of stuff. But it can be have a real stranglehold on very personal elements of people's lives that can be hugely damaging. And of course, when someone's ensconced in a faith and everyone they know is in that faith, or most people they're connected with, they grow to accept it and they think it's a totally reasonable thing for a religious institution to do. When in actuality, faith is best placed, if it's going to benefit humanity, it's best placed by providing small bits of social guidance, psychosocial guidance, really. Encouraging prayer is a great one because prayer is basically just meditation disguised as something else. You're just talking to someone else instead of to yourself. Very healthy thing to do. getting young children to dress up smartly on a Sunday morning, go somewhere and sit quietly is an excellent thing to do. Getting them away from TikTok and that sort of stuff, encourage them to chat with members of their community, and if someone's struggling, you get people around them that are able to ask them what's wrong and help them with that. Those things are really, really useful for society. And in a way, I'm sure this is not exactly a revelatory observation, but that is kind of damaging that we've lost a lot of that, those benefits from faith and community. I think really optimally what we need to do as a society is to try and find a sort of analog for that, effectively like a citizenship church.
It's like secularize it, essentially.
Yeah, basically, yeah, go somewhere and get, where you can get sort of advice on mental health, advice on diet, advice on lifestyle choices, maybe even things like basic financial training, so that people can get into more comfortable situations in their lifestyle, and encouraging people to be able to meet and help each other and socialize and go do charity work, but just not under the auspices of an omnipotent mega deity who's going to torture you forever if you're gay.
Yes, basically there's that. I mean, the gay question added a lot to all this, and that was quite a difficult one for me to kind of get my head around. And there were some other opinions on that in the flat, weren't there? And we had a lot of discussions around kind of the views on homosexuality and why it wasn't allowed in Mormonism and Islam. And again, it was an example of me getting to see Zayd be less orthodox. Because if you're very orthodox, then being gay, I believe, in Islam is punishable by death. But Zayd's there, who has gay friends, and he says, well, I don't agree with that. And so you think, well, okay, right. So there's someone that is very orthodox. He prays. I know he prays. I went to mosque with him, which was another brilliant experience. But he's able to disagree with his faith and decide that he doesn't agree with that part of it, and still remain involved and in its community. Because one of the big fears for someone like me is that they'll lose their community. In a big way, I did. I moved from my home town to Oxford, and this new community in Oxford is quite nuanced and quite able to accept my ideas and my opinions. We just had a lesson today about Adam and Eve, and I was able to talk about it in symbolic senses and say, well, symbolically, this is a lesson for us because of this, because of that. In a room full of where some people believe that it was literally true, that it happened in 4000 BC in Jackson County, Missouri. That's Mormon doctrine. But I'm able to now sit in a position to say, well, I can still be involved in the community, but I don't have to believe that that's literally true. And we saw a lot of the groundwork of that laid out in the flat.
Definitely, yeah, because people often say, oh, you can't cherry pick with the belief system, but really you can. If you find useful tenements within a faith or things that are useful to you, you can really, because I mean, fundamentally, if the faith isn't entirely true, you're safe to do that. You're safe from judgment, from whatever is written down in the scripture. And I absolutely agree with you. The fact that there were those forms of challenges. I realized that we didn't mention the fact that over the course of being at the flat, I think Connor and I both went to the Manchester Mormon Temple.
Yes.
Church.
Yes. I took you to meet missionaries, didn't I? Of course I did.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't
we went there and we got some Mandarin lessons from. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you were only too eager. But at the same time, though, you were also up for coming to the mosque for Friday prayers, I think, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's just a regular night at the mosque with Zayd. I think was it just the three of us that went, Zayd included?
Yes, it was. Yep.
Yeah, and that was within a fairly short span of time. It was really great seeing those perspectives. Unfortunately, I didn't have a sort of non-believers equivalent of a church. I mean, we went to see a Marvel movie, but other than that, I don't think there's any other thing that I was able to offer.
Wait, you mean just so the people at home know, you didn't take me to like sacrifice some goats or like praise Karl Marx or
praise Karl Marx? Yeah, that's because every atheist is
we were in
a full-blown Marxist. That's true.
That's
true. In fact, we even went for a drink at the Crescent Pub where the Communist Manifesto was written. Yeah.
So there you
go. Yeah, full disclaimer, I'm absolutely not a Marxist, just to make sure that that's fully clear.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw like the watchers numbers just start going down and down and down. Yeah. It's no, that was really interesting. You guys got to meet the missionaries. What was that like? Tell the world what it's like for an atheist to meet the missionaries, because they're all here to hear what it's like for you.
It was strange because it was a little bit. This is going to sound so weird. It was a little bit like getting introduced to a couple that have been together for a while, in the sense that they they feel comfortable with each other such that they don't need to continue to interact with each other directly when they're in the same space. So if you're in a group of, say, 5 people and you're out, say, having a dinner, you generally want to acknowledge and interact with all 4 of the other people because it feels rude if you don't really interact with the other. Whereas a long-term couple, they'll sit next to each other, but they might not even directly chat because they're just the same. They're two halves of a whole or whatever. Bizarrely, it was the same with the missionaries we met. They were, I can't remember where they were from. They're teaching us Mandarin. So I guess they
were Americans.
They were that was it. Yeah.
So the reason they knew Mandarin is because there's so many Chinese students in Manchester. They were assigned to basically walk up and down Oxford Road in Manchester and speak with students. And so because there's so many Chinese students, they were there to teach them. At one point, they've actually started up a Chinese ward now in Manchester in that same building, just for Chinese speakers. There's that many people that join the church.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it has such a it's able to sort of get such a hook in with people from China.
But
I
anyway,
don't know why that is. It doesn't really have
teaching us
anything
Mandarin.
similarity. Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were very nice, very pleasant people. That's the thing. Everyone is. Everyone was very, very nice there. It was immediately uncomfortable when the male and female areas were separated, and there was like a picture, a portrait of what looks like to me Jesus seeing his own self. But it's because I learned that in Mormonism, Jesus and God look exactly the same, and they're both white. Very, very weird. Very, very. It raises another 50 questions.
Being the only white kid in the Middle East, must have been bullied.
Yeah,
so
they must have been like, Caucasians aren't in. What are you? Yeah, that must have been very strange for him. So yeah, that was again, that was a little uncomfortable. There was also an uncomfortable element when I spoke with the missionaries who were teaching us about the fact that nobody other than people who are Mormons or maybe a certain rank, I'm sure you can fill this in for me, can access the temple and access certain rooms.
Yes, that was one that you were very uncomfortable with. Is that unless you pay your tithing, unless you pay your 10%, and you do other things like you agree you keep the Mormon health code and you agree that you will sustain the leaders, which obey them, then if you don't do those things, you can't go to the Mormon temple, which is where we make covenants with God and where we perform ordinances which we believe are essential to us becoming saved in the highest tier of Mormon heaven.
Yeah, it's another, we use the term in the Flack Word a lot, star babies. Whenever someone in a faith or any kind of special group wanted to be like, we're special, this is a special club for us, this is our clubhouse. We used it in lots of political terms, social terms, and then also, yeah, indeed. So that's one of the star baby moments for Mormonism, where it's like, do you want special access to the special club, then you can do this. Uncomfortable, it's behind a paywall, so it's not down to faith or devotion, it's just down to your credit card. And the things you can access you can't speak about, which of course raises a lot of red flags because other faiths which have secrecy clauses like that are things like Scientology, where they're hiding absurd things behind pay barriers. So it raised more concerns for people who aren't in the faith. And of course, that means that no one can question it.
I only just realized this. And when I went to the temple, I went there and I went through the endowment ceremony. So I went through the Mormon ceremony for the first time. And then so you go there, you don't speak. It's presented to you. Then you go up into a room that represents heaven. And again, you sit in there around your family and friends. You're not really allowed to talk. You have to whisper, if anything. You can't talk. And then you leave and you get in the car and you're told that you can't talk about what happens in the temple outside the temple. You're not allowed to talk about it outside. So something crazy has just happened to me. Something very different to anything I'm used to has just happened to me. And at no point have I had a chance to talk to anybody about it. And the only way I can talk... Well, there's no way I can talk about it unless you do what I did and you serve part of your missionary service as a temple worker, which I think was part of my unveiling Mormonism, part of picking it apart and seeing through the orthodoxy, was that I was allowed to basically live and breathe within the temple with much older people and talk about it much more openly and question it more openly than a lot of people my age get the chance to, because I was living on site, so I felt like I could talk about it.
Yeah. You were like, what about the termites?
Yeah, well, I was like, well, what about the fact that all these symbols here are similar to Freemasonry? What about that? Why? And then Joseph Smith was a Freemason, so what about that? And I'm starting to ask some of these questions that you wouldn't necessarily get a chance to ask. But you're absolutely right. It's set up in such a way that you can't really talk about it or question it. It kind of just happens to you.
It's all barriers. It's similar, really, of sort of the anti-alarmism protocols in the Soviet Union, and like ignorance being your strength, blocking people from discussing things. And really, you feel as though anything you can trust, and if it's God's word, you would want everyone to talk about it always with no restrictions, because if it's supposedly divine truth, you basically just want that to be the only thing anyone ever talks about. So yeah,
it's kind of like when we just had a recent meeting with Mormon leaders, and I recorded it and put it online so other people could see it because they hadn't left it up. And then the church's lawyers contacted me in less than 24 hours and said, take it down. If you were God's true church on the earth, surely you would want everyone to hear what its leaders have to say all the time.
Free signal boost. They're business people. They're marketing. Why would they not want everyone to see that?
There was like 10,000 views. 10,000 views.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, take it down because it's on your channel. That's why they took it down. They didn't like it.
See, from an outsider perspective, it's obvious that that's an insane decision for them to make. But from an insider perspective, I'm sure that it's so coloured, to be like, this is just how things are done. The church will present itself how it wants to present itself in God's way or whatever. They'll find some excuse to prevent people having an open discussion about it, which is just such a toxic element. But it's so nice that toxicity that is present in so many faiths wasn't present in the flat. I think it's one of the reasons it led to us being able to have such open discussions about things and have our minds changed on things. And I'm still one day going to get you all to agree with adequate determinism. One day.
No.
I'll get you.
Right. So my question for you, Michael, as we kind of are starting to round this off a little bit, is how would you go about encouraging others to have these conversations with people of faith from an atheist perspective? And how would you go about giving advice on how to do? So how would you encourage them to do it? But how would you give them advice on the mechanics of it, of making it successful as you see it was with me? And feel free to explain how you feel it was successful if you do.
But the best standpoint, or starting point rather, is to use steel men as your absolute top tool.
Explain.
I think when you're discussing, pardon me. Yeah, so there's straw men and steel men in debate and discussion. Essentially, if you build a straw man of your opponent's argument, you warp their argument such that it isn't really genuine. Doesn't really match what the person believes, but it's much easier to defeat logically. So that's a fallacy in debate. But a steel man is the opposite. It's when you round your opponent's position in as strong a way as you possibly can, so it's as close to what they genuinely believe, but has set a foundation that everybody listening to that discussion fully understands what that position is. So you can attack it, properly. I think act from a position as though you almost want to be brought around to the other person's perspective. So be as honest as you can when summarizing their positions and ask them questions. Extract as much information as you can, because as you ask questions, if there are any gaps in their logic and reasoning, they'll have to fill those gaps in. As they feel more compelled to do that, and they feel forced to do that as you ask more and more questions, they'll start being a little bit more open about their beliefs, the things that they're not 100% certain on, and you can start to have really healthy discussions around the gaps. The key element, though, is having a discussion with somebody that you believe has enough personal honesty and intellectual respect for themselves that they'll be able to acknowledge those gaps and appreciate them. But I think that's the best way to do it. Effectively allow them to control the discussion, ask questions, and that's the healthiest way to do it. Don't force an idea down someone's throat. Otherwise, you'll just get the blowback effect.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so how would you encourage people to engage in these discussions?
Absolutely. I think it's the most important thing to do. And even on things about which you're completely adamant and things you're really sure, socially, politically, spiritually, have a discussion about something that you think is really healthy. When we're having debates online with our flatmates over Discord or in person, generally speaking, we encourage each other to uphold positions that we don't actually hold ourselves, because it forces you to stretch your mind and attack that. So I actually had a climate change debate with the person in our flat who works in climate science. And that was really, really healthy for both of us. I think it really stretched our minds. And that doesn't mean you need to come around to that position. Doesn't mean anything. It's just a really healthy way to be able to explore ideas.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things I learned to do was put myself in someone else's shoes, which I think as a Mormon we don't do very often. And that was a nice thing for me to be taught, because I learnt that if I can appreciate how someone else views the world, I might just learn something from them, and it doesn't necessarily mean I have to change my views, but it could mean that I could improve my views, and take what they have. There's an old adage in Mormonism that seems to have got lost over the years that we take everyone and whatever truth they bring, and I think we need more of that in Mormonism, not less. We need more heterodoxy. We need more people willing to push the boundaries and push the envelope, as you see I try to do here. And a lot of that is thanks to you, Michael. And there's been a lot of people in the comments thanking you for this.
Oh, awesome.
I certainly thank you for my time at university and for teaching me how to have a good discussion, if nothing else.
Well, I'm super grateful for all the window into Mormonism that you've shown me, and for all the discussions we had. All fantastic. Yeah, I'll try and work out what to convince you of next.
So would you mind taking a couple of questions from people in the chat? Would that be okay?
I would not mind. That sounds great.
Okay, wonderful. So guys, start popping your questions in the chat. And we'll just take a couple of questions and then we'll sign off, I think. But let's, while we're waiting for some of those questions, let's just talk for a moment about the debate where I had to argue that not all religions are cults.
Yes, that was I actually still have the notes. I think I was moderating that one.
You were moderating.
Yeah, that was a very interesting discussion. So you were arguing that all religions were cults. Is that right?
Were not.
No, I got that wrong. Yeah. Sorry, pardon me. And Zaid was arguing that they were, which is it's such a great, again, talking about taking a position that you don't actually hold and fighting on that side of things, just temporarily playing devil's advocate with yourself. Such a fantastic thing to do, and such a useful discussion. And you had so much to draw upon, of course. Being able to use the talking points and the parroted phrases that you'd heard and been taught to defend yourself as you grew up. You were able to actually employ those in a debate and see how they held up against scrutiny, which is great.
So we've got a question for you. We've got Sam asking, Michael, were you raised in a religious home? Tell me about it.
Well, to some extent, no. So the way I was raised, I guess, is kind of quite rare. So we don't have any rules in the house about whether you discuss politics or religion, but we don't really speak openly about it. There's no problem with it, and we're all welcome to. But I don't know the way that my family votes, my brothers or my parents, and we never generally discuss that. We use our own life experiences so as not to colour each other. Similarly with religion, my mum is a Christian, and she became more religious after her father died. Interestingly, her brother became less religious. They took the staying in the boat and trying to swim approaches. And my father is, I believe, an agnostic atheist, though I'm not sure. And he had a period of his life where he was a Zen Buddhist, exploring that. So I had lots of mixture. When I was 11 years old, so it's quite a lengthy answer. When I was 11 years old, I asked my mum to be taken to the Methodist church where my scout group was held. I was really into scouting. So I started going to church on Sundays. We must have gone for about 3 months or something. But almost from the beginning, I would ask her questions on the way home about, did Lot's wife really turn into a pillar of salt? Can women do that? And et cetera, et cetera.
Can women
and after
do
a while,
that?
Yeah. So, quick side note. For reasons I shan't explain, I was going through a load of Jehovah's Witness material recently as part of the Watchtower Society magazine they give out. One of the things in that for children was a join up the dots puzzle, but the image they were constructing was Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. I'll send it to you later, and you can put it wherever you like. It was fantastic.
Send it to me. I'll put it on the Instagram.
Yeah. I left the faith, not left the faith, but I sort of didn't get that into Christianity as a result of that. Growing up, my best friend from a very young age was an Orthodox Jew. And so I used to go to his house for Hanukkah every year. So I had quite a lot of involvement in religion, but the home wasn't a singular religion. Incredibly long answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer. And what led you, my follow-up question is, what led you to ultimately settle on atheism?
Well, so I got interested in philosophy when I was very young. And as soon as I lost interest in going to church, nothing sort of replaced that. It took me a while to fully understand the benefits of religion. It seemed, that a lot of it was quite toxic and quite restrictive and not true. And then I didn't sort of read any Dawkins or anything like that when I was young.
I was going to ask, did you go through a Dawkins moment?
I actually didn't, and I didn't even catch the atheism movement on YouTube very much. There was one YouTube channel called Qualia Soup, which might still exist, and I watched a video on that about cognitive biases and how they can affect discussion. They also did a video on the existence of ghosts, which kind of introduced me to a load of logical patterns. And then they did a video on the what's it, Douglas Adams' puddle argument, which, by the way, is hilarious and also fantastic. And from those, I thought, oh, you can describe your beliefs and your reasons for not believing things with a really useful like chain of logic. I should try and do this more. And yeah, once I started doing that, no faith was able to sway me or convince me that things were true. It wasn't helped by the fact that my Orthodox Jew friend was putting, mezuzahs above all the doors and wearing, certain performing tefillin and wasn't able to eat a load of foods. He used to bring paper plates over to my house because our plates weren't kosher because they had non-kosher food served on them. It was, I was like, this doesn't seem like you're correct, basically. Yeah, dude.
Well, someone's saying they love Quality of Soup. So
awesome, yeah.
is also an awesome channel. I remember we watched a fair bit of
Armored Skeptics his brother's channel,
at University. Did we not? We watched Armored Skeptics talk about Atlantis.
Yes, he's more of a conspiracy theory kind of, although he has done a lot of videos on Christians as well. Armored Skeptic videos back in the day, they were really, really good. Amazing Atheist, not so much. There's someone called Cosmic Skeptic who's pretty good. And Rationality Rules is very good if you want to learn the specifics of things like logical fallacies and how to specifically debate and argue.
Right, you're being asked for channel suggestions, and I think you're providing them beautifully. So
people
know where to go.
Yeah, so those are really good. In terms of ones that are actually for faiths, I want to know more about Islam generally, and obviously I could only learn a certain amount from Zaid because he was from a specific denomination. There's a channel, I think, called Muhammad Hijab. I think that's what he's called. I probably got that wrong. He does really interesting videos on Islam that are really useful if you want to learn more about that faith. And I can't think of others that are useful for the other major denominations, but there are certainly a lot out there.
Okay, so there's plenty of stuff for you guys to be watching. Of course, as long as you stick around and watch some of this stuff as well.
Yeah. Make sure you subscribe to Nemo first.
I think, well, on that crass note, we shall end. And if you have any final words, Michael?
I do. Sorry, I've got my phone on the side. Someone has just asked what my favorite whiskey is. Can I quickly answer that one?
Sure.
Yeah, cool. So my favorite whiskey is Wild Turkey American Honey. I used to be a mixologist. If you want to make a fantastic old fashioned, you want to get 1 measure of wild turkey and 1 measure of Wild Turkey American Honey, and make sure to spend at least 8 minutes preparing it. That's the answer to
8
indeed, that's
minutes.
Well, supposedly it's meant to be 12, but the thing is, that means if you make 5, it takes an hour. So I think 8 is the correct amount of time.
Okay. Wonderful. Right, yeah, so you said you got a final point from your notes there? Or was that it? Or was it just the whiskey question?
Just the whiskey question. Other than that, I'm really super grateful for all the discussions we had in the flat. I thought that was a really great year for all the stuff we learned. And I think that generally, if I could take an aspect of my life and be able to grant it to loads of other people, basically in the world, it would be for them to have an opportunity to spend what is essentially a year in a safe space to be able to discuss. I don't just mean safe space in terms of triggers and political things, but I mean safe as in you can discuss any viewpoint and it can be open and honest about it. I think that was a really healthy experience for all of us, and I'm really grateful for it. And I'm super glad that we had you in the flat. That was a really nice bit of spice to add into it.
I'm really grateful for it too, and I think if you don't have that environment around you, create it. If you can, create it for others. That's the only way that we're going to have good conversations about any of this, is to act in good faith, is to show respect for other people's beliefs while challenging them. That can be done. The church teaches us it can't, and it makes us think that everything is... People are bad, people are horrible if they challenge or question us, but that's just not the case, as Michael has hopefully proved. So this was a Mormon and an atheist chatting to you about how to have good discussions. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great evening.
Have a good evening, guys.